I was looking for a birthday gift for my neighbor when I saw it, hanging on a pegboard behind the cash register at Monroe Street Pawn, between a collection of old watches and tarnished silver spoons, was my house key. Not one that looked like mine. Mine. The same brass key with the chip on the left edge from when I dropped it in the parking lot 3 years ago. Attached to the pink ribbon keychain my granddaughter made me in 2nd grade. The one my son Derek swore got lost during the move when I downsized from the family home into my condo 6 months ago. My hands went cold. My vision tunneled. And in that moment, standing in a dusty shop that smelled like old leather and broken promises, I understood that everything I'd been trying not to see for the past half year was about to crack wide open. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The woman behind the counter, a tired-looking blonde with chipped nail polish and kind eyes, noticed me staring. She followed my gaze to the keychain and asked if I was interested in something. I pointed with a trembling finger and said I wanted to see it. She unhooked it from the board and placed it in my palm. The metal was warm from the overhead lights. I turned it over and there on the back of the key were my initials. VLM. Vivian Louise Marsh. Engraved by my late husband 40 years ago when we bought our first house together. I asked her how much. She checked a small tag tied to the ribbon and said $15. I asked when it came in. She pulled up her computer, squinting at the screen, and said 3 weeks ago. I asked who brought it in. She hesitated, glancing toward the security camera in the corner, then back at me. She said she couldn't give out names without a police report. But her eyes softened when she saw my face, and she added quietly that it was a younger man, maybe early 30s, came in with a box of items. Sold the whole lot. I felt the floor tilt under me. Derek is 32. I paid for the key without another word, clutching it so tightly the edges bit into my skin. Then I asked if any of the other items from that box were still here. She looked uncomfortable, but she walked me to a glass display case near the window. Inside were 3 pieces of jewelry I recognized instantly. My mother's sapphire ring, the pearl earrings Tom gave me on our 20th anniversary, and a gold locket that held photos of my children when they were small. The items Derek said were lost. The ones he helped me pack personally, promised he'd keep safe, swore he put in storage until I was ready to go through everything. I bought all 3 pieces. It cost me $420. Money I didn't plan to spend. Money I'd been saving for Christmas gifts. But I handed over my credit card like I was buying back pieces of my own soul. The clerk wrapped everything carefully in tissue paper and placed it in a small brown bag. Before I left, I asked if there was any chance she remembered what else was in that box. She bit her lip, thought for a moment, then said there were a few other things. A men's watch, some old coins, and she thought maybe a small painting. All sold within the first week. She said if I wanted to file a report, she'd be happy to pull the transaction records. I thanked her and walked out into the bright afternoon, blinking against the sunlight like I just crawled out of a cave. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, staring at the brown bag on the passenger seat. My phone buzzed twice. Both times it was Derek, asking if I wanted to come over for dinner this weekend. Asking if I'd picked up the birthday card for his daughter yet. Casual. Normal. Like he hadn't sold off pieces of my history for cash while lying straight to my face. I drove home in silence, parked in my assigned spot, and carried the bag upstairs to my condo. The place still felt temporary even after 6 months. Boxes I hadn't unpacked yet stacked in the spare bedroom. Furniture that didn't quite fit the new space. Photos I hadn't hung because I kept thinking I'd get around to it later. I set the bag on the kitchen counter and made myself a cup of tea, the same ritual I'd done every day since Tom died, the one constant I could control. Then I opened the bag and laid everything out. The key, the ring, the earrings, the locket. I opened the locket and looked at the tiny photographs inside. Derek at age 4, gap-toothed and grinning. His sister Rachel at 6, holding a dandelion. Both of them long before life got complicated. Long before I became someone they saw as a burden instead of a person. The move had been Derek's idea. After Tom passed, the house felt too big, too full of memories that made it hard to breathe. Derek said I'd be safer in a condo, closer to medical facilities, easier to maintain. He said he'd help me sort through everything, pack up what mattered, donate the rest. He showed up every weekend with his wife Simone, and together they worked through closets and cabinets, asking me what I wanted to keep. I trusted them. I trusted him. When we got to the jewelry box, I remember hesitating. These pieces weren't just valuable. They were the last physical connections I had to people I loved who were gone. My mother. My husband. My own history. Derek said he'd put them somewhere safe, that we'd deal with them later when I was settled. Simone smiled and nodded, her hand on his arm reassuring. I believed them. But now I knew. Later never came because the jewelry never went into storage. It went to a pawn shop 3 weeks after I moved in. Sold for quick cash by the son I raised, the boy I worked 2 jobs to put through college, the man I co-signed a car loan for when his credit wasn't good enough. The same man who told me just last month that he couldn't afford to help with my new water heater because things were tight. I sat at my kitchen table until the tea went cold, turning my mother's ring over and over in my fingers. Then I got up, walked to the closet where I kept my important documents, and pulled out the folder I hadn't looked at in months. Inside was the updated will I'd signed 2 years ago when Tom got sick. The one that left everything to Derek and Rachel equally. The house sale money, the life insurance payout, my savings, all of it divided 50-50 when I died. But there was another document in that folder. One my estate attorney, Patricia, had insisted I sign as a precaution. A revocable living trust that allowed me to change beneficiaries at any time, for any reason, without needing anyone's permission. At the time I thought it was excessive. Now I understood it was the only leverage I had left. I picked up my phone and called Patricia's office. Her assistant said she was booked solid for 2 weeks, but I interrupted and said it was urgent. There was a pause, some muffled conversation. Then Patricia herself got on the line. She asked what was wrong. I told her I needed to revise my trust immediately. She asked if I was safe, if someone was pressuring me. I told her I was completely safe and completely certain. She said she'd make time tomorrow morning. That night I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the small moments I'd ignored. The way Simone asked too many questions about my finances. The way Derek always seemed annoyed when I needed help with something. The way they exchanged looks when I mentioned wanting to travel or take a class, like I was being ridiculous for having plans. I thought it was normal family friction. I thought I was being oversensitive. But selling my jewelry wasn't friction. It was theft. And the lie about it being lost wasn't a mistake. It was calculated. I thought about calling Rachel, my daughter who lived 2 states away, and called every Sunday like clockwork. But something stopped me. Rachel and Derek had always been close. If I told her what I found, would she believe me? Or would she think I was confused, misremembering, slipping into the fog of old age they all seemed so convinced was coming for me? The next morning I dressed carefully. Navy slacks, a cream blouse, the pearl necklace Tom gave me for our 25th anniversary, the one I'd been wearing the day of his funeral. I wanted to look exactly like what I was. A woman who knew her own mind. I drove to Patricia's office downtown, parked in the garage, and took the elevator to the 12th floor. Patricia met me in the lobby herself, which she never did. She was in her late 50s, sharp-eyed and sharper dressed, the kind of woman who noticed everything. She guided me into her office, closed the door, and sat across from me with her hands folded on the desk. She asked me to tell her what happened, so I did. I told her about the pawn shop, the key, the jewelry, the lies. I told her about the money Derek said he didn't have while he was apparently selling my belongings for cash. Patricia didn't interrupt. She listened with the focused intensity of someone who'd heard worse but still cared. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and asked what I wanted to do. I said I wanted to remove Derek from my trust entirely. She asked if I was sure. I said I'd never been more sure of anything. She pulled up my file on her computer and walked me through the options. I could reallocate Derek's portion to Rachel, to charity, or to anyone else I designated. I could also add conditions, requirements that had to be met before any funds were released. She said some clients used these conditions as a way to incentivize certain behaviors, or to protect against exploitation. I thought about it carefully. Rachel hadn't done anything wrong, but I didn't know if she was part of this or just unaware. I needed time to find out, so I made a decision. I would reallocate Derek's entire share, roughly $430,000, to a revocable designation. Half would go to Rachel unconditionally. The other half would go to a scholarship fund in Tom's name for local students studying engineering, his field. But there was one more thing. I wanted a clause that said if Derek made any attempt to contact me, apologize or explain himself within 30 days, I'd reconsider. Not because I wanted his apology, but because I wanted to see if he'd even try. If he'd even notice something was wrong before the money disappeared. Patricia drafted everything while I waited. 2 hours later, I signed the new documents, initialed every page, and watched her seal them with her notary stamp. She made copies, put the originals in her safe, and handed me a folder with my set. She asked if I wanted her to notify Derek. I said no. I'd handle that part myself. I walked out of that office feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because I'd taken action. Heavier because I knew what was coming. The fallout. The accusations.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The possibility that my son would never speak to me again, not out of respect, but out of rage that I dared to hold him accountable. I stopped for lunch at a small cafe near the waterfront. The kind of place Tom and I used to go on Saturdays when the kids were grown and the house felt too quiet. I ordered soup and sat by the window, watching people walk by with their dogs and their coffee cups and their uncomplicated lives. I wondered if any of them were sitting on secrets like mine. If any of them had family members who smiled to their faces and sold their memories behind their backs. My phone buzzed. It was Simone, texting to confirm dinner this weekend. She added a smiley face and said she was making my favorite lasagna. I stared at that message for a long time. The performance of normalcy. The pretense that nothing was wrong. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my photos and scrolled back to the day of the move. There were pictures Derek had taken. Me standing in the empty living room of the old house. Boxes stacked everywhere. Furniture wrapped in blankets. In one photo, I was holding the jewelry box, the same wooden box my father made for my mother in 1952. Derek was beside me, his arm around my shoulder, smiling at the camera. Simone must have taken the shot. I zoomed in on his face. He looked so genuine, so trustworthy. I closed the app and paid for my lunch. Then I drove to the one place I knew I could think clearly. The cemetery where Tom was buried. I parked near his headstone and walked across the grass, careful to avoid the sprinkler zones. I sat down on the stone bench we'd installed last year and looked at his name carved into the granite. Thomas Edward Marsh. Beloved husband, father, and friend. I told him everything. Out loud like he was sitting next to me. I told him about the pawn shop, the lies, the documents I signed. I told him I didn't know what to do next. That I was angry and heartbroken and scared that I'd made the wrong choice. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves in the oak tree overhead. And I imagined it was him telling me I'd done the right thing. That standing up for myself wasn't cruelty. It was survival. I stayed until the sun started to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Then I drove home, made myself dinner, and sat down to write a letter. Not to Derek. To Rachel. I needed her to know the truth before Derek spun his version of events. I needed her to understand that this wasn't about money or revenge. It was about dignity. I wrote for over an hour, crossing out lines and starting over, trying to find the right words. In the end, I kept it simple. I told her what I found. I told her what I did. I told her I loved her and hoped she'd understand. I sealed it in an envelope, wrote her address on the front, and left it on the table to mail in the morning. That night, I finally unpacked one of the boxes from the spare bedroom. Inside were photo albums from when the kids were young. Birthday parties, beach trips, school plays. I flipped through the pages slowly, looking for the moment when things changed. When Derek stopped being the boy who brought me dandelions and started being the man who saw me as a problem to solve. I didn't find an answer. Maybe there wasn't one. Maybe people just drift, slowly, until the distance becomes so normal, you don't notice you're strangers. I put the albums back in the box and went to bed. Tomorrow I'd mail the letter. Tomorrow the 30-day countdown would begin. Tomorrow Derek would either prove me wrong or confirm everything I feared. But tonight I let myself grieve. Not for the jewelry or the money. For the son I thought I had. The one who existed in my memory but maybe never existed at all. The next morning, I mailed the letter to Rachel from the post office 2 blocks away. The clerk stamped it and tossed it into the outgoing bin. and I watched it disappear with a strange sense of finality. There was no taking it back now. Whatever happened next was out of my hands. I spent the rest of the day organizing my condo, a task I'd been avoiding since the move. I hung pictures on the walls, arranged books on the shelves, and finally opened the box of kitchen items I'd been eating around for months. It felt important somehow to make this place feel like mine. Not a waiting room. Not a temporary stop. Mine. By late afternoon, I was exhausted but satisfied. The condo looked lived in, loved even. I made myself a cup of tea and sat on the couch, looking around at the space I'd created. For the first time since Tom died, I felt something close to peace. That peace lasted exactly 4 hours. At 8:30 that evening, there was a knock on my door. Sharp, insistent, the kind of knock that doesn't wait for an answer. I looked through the peephole and saw Derek standing in the hallway. His face flushed, his jaw tight. Simone was behind him, arms crossed, expression unreadable. I took a breath, steadied myself, and opened the door. He didn't wait for an invitation. He pushed past me into the living room, Simone following close behind. He turned to face me, and I saw it in his eyes. The letter had arrived. Rachel must have called him immediately. "What the hell is this?" he said, holding up his phone. "Rachel just called me in tears saying you're cutting me out of your will. She said you found something at a pawn shop. What are you talking about?" I closed the door slowly and turned to face him. I didn't sit down. I didn't offer them seats. I just stood there, arms at my sides, and said calmly, "I found my house key. The one you said was lost in the move. It was at Monroe Street Pawn, along with my mother's ring, my pearl earrings, and the locket with your baby pictures in it." His face went pale. Simone looked at him sharply, and I saw something flicker in her expression. Surprise maybe, or confirmation. Derek started to speak, then stopped. Started again. "That's impossible. Those things were lost. I don't know how they ended up there, but I didn't put them there." I walked to the kitchen counter and picked up the receipt from the pawn shop. I'd kept it, along with the transaction details the clerk had printed for me. I handed it to him. The date matches 3 weeks after I moved in. The description matches the items exactly. The clerk said a man in his early 30s brought them in. "You're 32, Derek." He stared at the paper like it was written in a language he didn't understand. Then he looked at Simone. She wouldn't meet his eyes. "I needed money," he said finally, his voice breaking. "We were behind on the mortgage. I thought those things were just sitting in storage anyway. You weren't using them. I was going to buy them back before you noticed." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "So you admit it?" He ran his hand through his hair, pacing now. "I didn't think it was a big deal. They're just things, Mom. Objects. I knew you'd get them back eventually." "They're not just things," I said, and my voice came out harder than I'd ever heard it. "That ring was my mother's. Those earrings were from my husband. That key was to the home we built together. You sold my history for mortgage payments and then you lied to my face about it." Simone finally spoke. "We were desperate, Vivian. You don't understand how hard it's been." I turned to her. "I understand that you could have asked me for help. I understand that you could have been honest. Instead, you stole from me and made me believe I was losing my mind." Derek's face hardened. "Oh, here we go. The guilt trip. You've always been good at that. Making everything about you." I stared at him. I didn't recognize the person standing in front of me. This wasn't the boy I raised. This was a stranger wearing his face. "I revised my trust," I said evenly. "You're no longer a beneficiary. Half of your share goes to Rachel. The other half goes to a scholarship fund in your father's name." His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "You can't do that." "I already did. It's legal, notarized, and filed. There's a clause that gives you 30 days to make this right. But honestly, Derek, I don't think you will." He laughed, sharp and bitter. "Make it right? You want me to grovel? Beg for forgiveness so I can get your money? I want you to understand what you did. I want you to see me as a person, not a resource. But I don't think you can." Simone grabbed his arm. "Let's go. This is pointless." Derek shook her off. "No, she doesn't get to do this. She doesn't get to ruin our lives because of some sentimental bullshit." I felt tears prick my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. "The only person who ruined anything here is you. Now please leave." He stared at me for a long moment, his face twisted with rage and something that might have been shame. Then he turned and stormed out, Simone close behind. The door slammed so hard the pictures on the wall rattled. I stood there in the silence, shaking. Then I walked to the couch, sat down and let myself cry. Not for the jewelry. Not for the money. For the son I'd lost long before tonight. For the future I'd imagined that would never exist. For the family I thought I had that turned out to be built on lies. When the tears finally stopped, I picked up my phone and called Patricia. She answered on the third ring, her voice alert despite the late hour. I told her what happened. She listened quietly, then said the 30-day clause still stands. If he changes his mind, he can reach out. But Vivian, I want you to prepare for the possibility that he won't. I know, I said. I think I've known for a while. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my condo and thought about what came next. Derek would likely tell people I was unstable, vindictive, maybe even mentally unwell. He'd paint himself as the victim of a cruel, irrational mother. And some people would believe him. But I had the receipts, the transaction records, the truth. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I had my dignity back. That was worth more than any inheritance. I got up, washed my face, and made myself another cup of tea. Then I sat down at my kitchen table and did something I hadn't done in decades. I wrote in a journal. I wrote about the pawn shop, the confrontation, the fear and anger and heartbreak. I wrote until my hand cramped and my eyes burned. And when I finally closed the journal and turned off the lights, I felt something unexpected. Not peace exactly, but clarity. The kind that comes when you stop pretending and start seeing things exactly as they are. Painful, yes, but also strangely freeing. The storm wasn't over. I knew that. But I'd weathered the first wave and I was still standing. That had to count for something. The morning after Derek left, I woke to 17 missed calls. 12 from Derek, 3 from Simone, and 2 from numbers I didn't recognize. There were text messages too, filling my screen with notifications I didn't want to read. I silenced my phone, made coffee, and sat on my small balcony watching the sun rise over the parking lot. The world kept turning like nothing had happened, which felt both comforting and surreal. Around 9 my landline rang. I kept it mostly for emergencies, and hardly anyone had the number anymore. Picked up cautiously. It was Rachel. Her voice was tight, strained in a way I'd only heard a handful of times in her life. "Mom," she said, "what's going on? Derek called me last night absolutely hysterical. He said you accused him of stealing and cut him out of your will over some misunderstanding." I closed my eyes and took a slow breath. "It's not a misunderstanding, sweetheart. I found my house key at a pawn shop. The one Derek said was lost during the move, along with Grandma's sapphire ring, the pearl earrings from your father, and the locket with your baby pictures." There was silence on the other end, long enough that I checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Then Rachel said quietly, "Are you absolutely sure it was yours? I mean, could it have been something similar?" "I have the receipt," I said. "The transaction date. The clerk's description of the man who sold them. It was 3 weeks after I moved into the condo. Rachel, he admitted it to my face last night. He said he needed mortgage money and planned to buy everything back before I noticed." Another pause. "Oh my God." I waited, letting her process. When she spoke again, her voice was different. Smaller. "Mom, I don't know what to say. I can't believe he would do that. I mean, I can believe money's tight for them, but stealing from you? That's insane." "Gets worse," I said. "He sold other things too. A men's watch that belonged to your father. Some coins from your grandfather's collection. Possibly more that I haven't found yet." The clerk said it was a whole box of items. Rachel made a sound that was half sob, half gasp. "What did you do?" I told her about the trust revision. About removing Derek and reallocating his portion. About the 30-day clause that gave him a chance to make amends if he chose to. Rachel listened without interrupting, and when I finished she said, "I don't blame you. I really don't. But Mom, you need to understand what this is going to look like to other people. Derek's already saying you're confused, that you're imagining things." I felt my jaw tighten. "I'm not confused. I have documentation." "I know that," Rachel said quickly. "I believe you. But he's going to fight this. He's going to make it ugly. And Simone's family is already on their side. Her sister called me this morning saying you were being manipulated by your grief, and that we need to stage an intervention." "An intervention," I repeated, the word sour in my mouth. "For what? Holding my son accountable?" Rachel sighed. I'm just warning you. This is going to get messy. Do you have everything documented? Receipts, transaction records, witnesses? I have all of it. My attorney has copies too. Good, Rachel said. Keep it that way. And Mom, I'm coming to visit. I'm getting on a plane tomorrow. You shouldn't have to deal with this alone. I felt a wave of relief so strong it nearly knocked me over. Thank you, I whispered. After we hung up, I sat with my coffee growing cold and thought about what Rachel said. Derek was already building his narrative. The confused elderly mother. The grief-stricken widow who couldn't think straight. The woman who needed protecting from herself. It was exactly what Simone had been suggesting for months, planting seeds so that when this moment came, the ground was already fertile. I spent the rest of the morning going through old emails and text messages, looking for patterns. I found them everywhere. Messages from Simone asking if I'd taken my medication, if I'd remembered to lock the door, if I was sure I'd turned off the stove. Little comments designed to make me question myself. Messages from Derek asking if I needed help managing my bills, suggesting I set up automatic payments so I wouldn't forget. I thought it was concern. Now I saw it for what it was. Groundwork. I printed everything. Emails, texts, bank statements showing the dates I'd given them money for various emergencies. I created a timeline on my kitchen table, laying it all out like a detective building a case. Because that's what this was now. Not a family dispute. A case. That afternoon I drove back to Monroe Street Pawn. The same clerk was there, and she recognized me immediately. Her face brightened, then fell when she saw my expression. Everything okay? She asked. I need to know if there's any way to get security footage from the day that box was brought in, I said. The one with my items. She bit her lip. We keep footage for 90 days. After that it's recorded over. But I'd need a police report or a subpoena to release it. I nodded slowly. What if I filed a police report now? Would you cooperate? She glanced around the empty shop, then leaned closer. Between you and me, yes. I hate when people use us to fence stolen goods. It gives the whole industry a bad name. If you file a report, I'll provide whatever documentation the police need. I thanked her and walked out with a new sense of purpose. I drove directly to the police station, a squat brick building downtown that smelled like burnt coffee and old paperwork. I asked to speak to someone about filing a theft report. The officer at the desk, a young man with tired eyes and a name tag that read Martinez, handed me a clipboard with forms. I filled them out carefully. Reported items. Approximate value. Last known location. Suspected perpetrator. My hand shook slightly when I wrote Derek's name, but I didn't cross it out. When I returned the clipboard, Officer Martinez reviewed it and looked up at me with something like sympathy. Ma'am, he said gently, you understand this is a family matter? We can take the report, but the DA might not prosecute even if we find evidence. Family theft cases are complicated. I understand, I said, but I need it on record. I need documentation that this happened. He nodded and said someone would follow up within a few days. I left feeling both validated and hollow. This was really happening. I was reporting my own son for theft. The finality of it settled over me like frost. When I got home, there was a car parked in my designated spot. Derek's car. My stomach dropped. I parked in a visitor spot and approached my building cautiously. Derek was sitting on the concrete steps leading to the entrance, head in his hands. He looked up when he heard my footsteps, and his face was blotchy and red. Mom, he said, standing quickly. Please. We need to talk. I stopped a few feet away, keys in hand. We talked last night. You admitted what you did. I know, he said, his voice cracking. And I was wrong. I was so wrong. I'm sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry. I studied him, looking for sincerity. What I saw was desperation. Are you sorry you did it, or sorry you got caught? Both, he admitted. I know that sounds terrible, but it's the truth. I made a horrible decision because I was panicking about money, and I convinced myself it wasn't really stealing because you're my mother and everything you have will be mine eventually anyway. I know how messed up that sounds. It sounds like you saw me as a bank account with a pulse, I said flatly. He flinched. That's not fair. Isn't it? You took things that meant the world to me, sold them for cash, and lied about it for months. What would you call that? He wiped his face with the back of his hand. I call it the worst thing I've ever done. And I'm asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to give me a chance to fix this. I looked at him standing there, my son, the person I'd loved longer than I'd loved anyone except Tom. The boy I'd nursed through chickenpox and helped with homework and taught to drive. And I felt nothing. No anger. No love. Just exhaustion. Did you buy any of it back? I asked. He looked down. No. I couldn't afford to. Everything got spent on bills. So your plan to buy it back before I noticed was a lie too. He didn't answer, which was answer enough. I'm not reinstating you in the trust, I said. Not now. Maybe not ever. The 30-day clause stands, but Derek, an apology isn't enough. You need to understand why this was so much worse than just needing money. You erased pieces of my history. You made me doubt myself. You let Simone convince people I was losing my mind so that when I found out what you'd done, no one would believe me. His face crumpled. I never wanted it to go this far. But it did, I said. And now you have to live with that. I walked past him toward the building entrance. He called after me, asking if we could at least talk more, if I'd let him prove he'd changed. I didn't turn around. I just unlocked the door and went inside, leaving him standing alone in the afternoon sun. That evening I couldn't settle. I paced my condo, picked up books without reading them, turned on the television and immediately turned it off again. Finally, I called Patricia and asked if I could add something to my documentation. She said of course and asked what I needed. I want to add a letter, I said. Something that explains why I made the changes I made. Not for Derek. For anyone who might question my mental competency down the road. She was quiet for a moment. You think someone might challenge the trust on those grounds? I think Simone has been building toward that possibility for months, I said. And if Derek gets desperate enough, he might try it. Patricia's voice hardened. Then we make it ironclad. I'll draft a letter for you to review. We'll have it notarized and witnessed by medical professionals if necessary. We'll document your full cognitive capacity beyond any possible dispute. The next day Rachel arrived. I picked her up from the airport and the moment I saw her walking through the arrival's gate, pulling her small suitcase behind her, I felt something in my chest unclench. She hugged me tight, the kind of hug that said more than words could. She smelled like lavender and coffee, familiar and safe. In the car she asked how I was holding up. I told her honestly that I didn't know. Some moments I felt strong and certain. Other moments I felt like I destroyed my family over material possessions. She reached over and squeezed my hand. You didn't destroy anything, she said firmly. He did. You're just refusing to pretend it didn't happen. We stopped for lunch at a quiet cafe near my condo, and I showed her everything. The receipts, the emails, the timeline I'd created. She studied it all with the careful attention she brought to everything. Her background in medical research making her methodical and precise. When she finished, she sat back and shook her head. This is damning, she said. This isn't confusion or grief or anything else they're going to try to claim. This is documentation of a pattern of financial exploitation and emotional manipulation. I felt validated and devastated at the same time. Hearing it stated so clinically made it real in a new way. Have you heard from him since yesterday? Rachel asked. He left 2 voicemails, I said. I haven't listened to them. She nodded. Probably for the best. Let him sit with what he's done for a while. We spent the afternoon at my condo, and Rachel helped me finish unpacking the last few boxes. We hung more pictures, organized my closet, arranged the bookshelf. Normal daughter and mother activities that felt surreal against the backdrop of everything else. At one point, Rachel found an old photo album tucked in a box of linens. She opened it and we sat together on the couch, flipping through pictures of family vacations and holidays. There was a photo of Derek at age 8, holding up a drawing he'd made of our family. Stick figures with circle heads and huge smiles, the house disproportionately large behind us. Rachel touched the picture lightly. What happened to him? She asked softly. I don't know, I said. Maybe nothing happened. Maybe this is who he always was and I didn't want to see it. That night, Rachel slept in my guest room, and I felt safer than I had in months knowing someone was there. Someone who believed me. Someone who saw the truth without me having to fight for it. The next morning my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but Rachel encouraged me to. It was Officer Martinez from the police station. He said they'd contacted the pawn shop and retrieved the security footage. He asked if I could come down to the station to view it and confirm identification. Rachel drove me. We sat in a small viewing room with Officer Martinez and another detective, a woman named Chun who introduced herself as specializing in elder financial abuse cases. The term made me wince. Elder abuse. I wasn't elderly. I was 72 and perfectly capable. Detective Chun must have seen my reaction because she said gently, "It's just the legal category, Mrs. Marsh. It doesn't mean anything about your capability. It just helps us prioritize cases where family members exploit older relatives." The footage was grainy but clear enough. A timestamp showed the date 3 weeks after my move. And there, on the screen, was Derek, carrying a cardboard box, setting it on the counter, talking to the clerk. I watched him pull out my jewelry, the coins, my father's pocket watch. Watched him nod when she made an offer. Watched him take the cash and leave. Detective Chun paused the video. "Is that your son?" "Yes," I said. My voice sounded far away. "And these are items he removed from your home without permission?" "Yes." She made notes. Officer Martinez asked if I wanted to press charges. I looked at Rachel. She looked back at me, her expression neutral, leaving the decision entirely to me. "I don't know yet," I said finally. "Can I have some time to think about it?" Detective Chun nodded. "You can. But Mrs. Marsh, I want you to understand something. This isn't just about punishing your son. It's about protecting yourself. If he did this once, he might do it again. And next time it might be your bank accounts, your property. Legal action creates a paper trail that can prevent escalation." Her words stayed with me as Rachel and I drove back to my condo. We didn't talk much. When we got inside, Rachel made us both tea and we sat at the kitchen table. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "I'm thinking that pressing charges feels like burning down a bridge I can't rebuild," I said. "But not pressing charges feels like telling him this was acceptable." Rachel considered this. "What would Dad do?" I smiled sadly. "Your father would say that consequences aren't punishment. They're education. He'd say that if Derek doesn't learn from this, he'll keep hurting people." "Then maybe you have your answer," Rachel said. That evening Derek showed up again. This time Rachel answered the door. I heard their voices in the hallway, Derek asking to see me, Rachel telling him firmly that now wasn't a good time. He raised his voice, saying he had a right to talk to his mother. Rachel's voice stayed calm but hard as steel. "You had that right until you stole from her and lied about it," she said. "Now you have whatever rights she chooses to give you. And right now she's choosing none." I heard him start to argue, then stop. Then footsteps retreating down the hall. Rachel came back inside and locked the door. She looked at me and said, "I'm staying as long as you need me." The next few days fell into a strange routine. Rachel and I would have breakfast, then spend the mornings organizing my life. She helped me set up online banking with alerts for every transaction. We created a password-protected file with all my important documents. She suggested I get a safety deposit box for the jewelry I'd recovered. And we did that too, driving to the bank and securing everything in a small metal box that only I had access to. In the afternoons, we'd take walks around the neighborhood or sit at coffee shops, talking about everything except Derek. Rachel told me about her work, her research on cellular regeneration. She told me about the man she'd been seeing, a fellow scientist named Marcus who made her laugh. Normal life continued even as mine felt suspended. On the fourth day, Simone called me. Rachel was in the shower, so I answered alone. Simone's voice was ice wrapped in sugar. "Vivian," she said, "I think we need to clear the air. This has all gotten so out of hand." I said nothing, just waited. "Derek made a mistake," she continued. "A serious mistake. But you have to understand the pressure we've been under. My mother's medical bills, the mortgage, Derek's job has been unstable. We were desperate. So you decided I should pay for your desperation without knowing about it," I said. She exhaled sharply. "It wasn't like that. Derek thought you wouldn't miss those things. You never wore that jewelry. It was just sitting in storage." "It was mine," I said. "It represented people I loved who are gone. It wasn't yours to take or his to sell. Everything's always about what you've lost, isn't it?" Simone snapped, her sweetness finally cracking. "Tom, your mother, your precious memories. You wallow in the past while the rest of us are trying to survive the present." I felt something cold and final settle in my chest. "This conversation is over," I said. "Wait," Simone said quickly. "I didn't mean that. I'm just stressed. Look, what if we pay you back? We can set up a payment plan. Would that fix this? The jewelry is already gone, I said. Sold to other people. There's no fixing that. And the trust stays as it is. You're really going to destroy your relationship with your son over this? She asked, disbelief sharp in her voice. He destroyed it himself, I said, and hung up. When Rachel came out of the shower, I told her about the call. She looked furious in a quiet, controlled way that reminded me of her father. She said we should document everything, every call, every visit, every attempt at manipulation. So we did. We created a log with dates and times and summaries of each interaction. That night I got an email from Derek. A long one full of apologies and explanations and promises to do better. He said he'd started seeing a therapist, that he recognized he had issues with money and boundaries, that he wanted to earn back my trust even if it took years. The email felt rehearsed, calculated, like something Simone had helped him write. I showed it to Rachel. She read it twice, then said, actions matter more than words. If he means any of this, he'll prove it over time. But you don't owe him anything right now. I didn't respond to the email. On Rachel's last day before her flight home, we drove to the cemetery. She'd asked to visit her father's grave, and I'd been avoiding it since the whole situation began. We parked and walked together across the grass, carrying the flowers we'd bought at the supermarket. Rachel knelt by the headstone and traced her father's name with her fingers. She was quiet for a long time, then said, I wish you were here, Dad. You'd know what to do. I sat on the bench nearby, the same one where I'd sat weeks ago after signing the trust revision. I said to both of them, Tom and Rachel, I keep wondering if I'm being too hard on him. If a mother is supposed to forgive anything. Rachel looked up at me. A mother is supposed to love her children. But she's also a person who deserves respect and dignity. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. I nodded, feeling the truth of it settle in my bones. We stayed until the sun started to set, then drove to the airport. Rachel hugged me goodbye at the curb, made me promise to call if anything changed, and reminded me that I wasn't alone in this. As I watched her walk into the terminal, I felt a pang of loneliness but also gratitude. I had one child who saw me clearly. That counted for something. The drive home felt longer than it should have. When I pulled into my parking spot, I saw Derek's car again, parked in the visitor area. My heart sank. But this time he wasn't alone. There was a woman with him, someone I didn't recognize. They were standing by his car talking. When I got out, Derek saw me and waved the woman over. Mom, he said, his voice strained with forced optimism. This is Dr. Brennan. She's a geriatric psychologist. I thought maybe if you talk to someone professional, someone objective, they could help sort through everything that's been happening. I looked at the woman. She was in her 50s, professionally dressed, carrying a leather portfolio. She smiled gently at me and extended her hand. Mrs. Marsh, she said, I specialize in helping families navigate difficult transitions. Your son is concerned about your well-being, and thought I might be able to provide some clarity. I didn't shake her hand. I looked at Derek. You brought a psychologist to ambush me in my own parking lot? It's not an ambush, he said quickly. I just thought you might need someone to talk to. Someone who isn't emotionally involved. What I need, I said slowly, is for you to respect my boundaries. I filed a police report, Derek. The officers have the security footage. This isn't confusion or grief. This is theft, and it's documented. Dr. Brennan's expression shifted slightly. She looked at Derek. You didn't mention a police report. Because it's based on a misunderstanding, Derek said, his voice rising. She thinks I stole from her, but I was just trying to help liquidate assets she didn't need anymore. I pulled out my phone and called Patricia. She answered immediately. I'm in my parking lot, I said. My son brought a psychologist to evaluate my mental state without my consent. I need you to document this. I'm documenting it now, Patricia said crisply. Put me on speaker. I did. Patricia's voice rang out clear and authoritative. This is Patricia Hendricks, Mrs. Marsh's attorney. Any attempt to have her evaluated without her explicit written consent will be considered harassment and potential grounds for a restraining order. I suggest you leave the premises immediately. Dr. Brennan stepped back, looking uncomfortable. Mr. Whitman, I think there's been a miscommunication. I can't evaluate anyone without their consent. She turned to me. I apologize for any distress this caused. She walked to her own car and drove away. Derek stood there, his face red, fists clenched at his sides. You're making this so much harder than it needs to be, he said. No, I said. You made it hard when you stole from me. I'm just refusing to pretend it didn't happen. I walked past him into my building, Patricia still on the line. Once I was inside my condo with the door locked, she said, that was either incredibly stupid or incredibly calculated. Either way, it doesn't help his case. What do I do now? I asked. You keep living your life, she said. You keep documenting everything. And you let him dig his own hole deeper. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the parking lot scene, the look on Derek's face when I refused to cooperate. There was something desperate there, something that scared me. Not physically, but emotionally. Like he was capable of anything to get what he wanted. I got up and double-checked all my locks. Made sure my important documents were still in the safety deposit box. Checked my bank accounts online to make sure nothing had been touched. Everything was secure. But I didn't feel secure. I made myself chamomile tea and sat by the window, watching the parking lot below. Derek's car was gone. But I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The 30-day window was halfway closed, and instead of making amends, he was escalating. I thought about Tom and what he would say if he could see all this. He'd probably tell me to stand firm, to not let anyone make me doubt myself. But he'd also say that choosing yourself doesn't mean you stop loving your children. It just means you love yourself enough not to be destroyed by them. I finished my tea and went back to bed. Tomorrow I decided I'd call Detective Chun and tell her I wanted to move forward with charges. Not because I wanted revenge, but because Dr. Brennan was right about one thing. I needed clarity, and the only way to get it was to stop letting Derek control the narrative. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Resolve. Not happiness. Not peace. But the solid, unshakable certainty that I was doing the right thing, even if it hurt. Especially because it hurt. Because the things worth protecting always do. The morning I called Detective Chun to press charges, the sky was the color of slate. I stood at my kitchen window with my phone in hand, watching clouds gather over the city, and thought about all the storms I'd weathered in my 72 years. Losing Tom. Raising 2 children mostly alone. Building a life from scratch after every major loss. This storm was different because I was choosing to walk into it with my eyes open. Detective Chun answered on the second ring. Her voice was warm but professional. Mrs. Marsh, what can I do for you? I want to move forward with charges, I said. Whatever that process looks like, I'm ready. She was quiet for a moment, and I could hear papers rustling. Okay. I need you to come down to the station one more time. We'll need a formal statement, and I'll walk you through what happens next. Can you come in this afternoon? I'll be there at 2, I said. I spent the morning preparing myself mentally. I showered, dressed in slacks and a blouse that made me feel competent, put on the small pearl earrings I'd recovered from the pawn shop. When I looked in the mirror, I saw someone I recognized again. Not a victim. Not a confused old woman. Just me. Vivian. Clear-eyed and certain. At the station, Detective Chun met me in the lobby and guided me to a quiet interview room. She explained the process carefully. Because this involved family and financial abuse, the district attorney would review the case and decide whether to prosecute. The security footage and my documentation would be key evidence. If they moved forward, Derek would be formally charged, likely with theft and possibly financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. I'm not vulnerable, I said quietly. Detective Chun smiled. I know that. But legally, anyone over 65 falls into a protected category. It's not about your capability. It's about recognizing that family members sometimes take advantage of trust in ways that deserve legal consequences. We spent 2 hours going through everything. She recorded my statement, made copies of all my receipts and documentation, and compiled a comprehensive file. When we finished, she walked me out and said the DA's office would be in touch within a week. I drove home feeling lighter and heavier at once. Lighter because I'd taken action. Heavier because I knew what this would unleash. I was right. 3 days later, Derek received notification that charges were being filed. He called me 17 times in 1 hour. I didn't answer. Then he showed up at my building, pounding on my door hard enough that my neighbor across the hall peeked out nervously. I called building security. They escorted him out and noted the incident in their log. That night he sent me an email. No apologies this time. Just rage. You're destroying me over a few pieces of jewelry. You're choosing objects over your own son. When I'm gone and you're alone, you'll regret this. You'll see that none of it mattered. I forwarded the email to Detective Chun and Patricia. Patricia called me immediately. This is harassment, she said. We can get a restraining order if you want one. Not yet, I said. But keep that option ready. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, life took on a surreal quality. I went to the grocery store and saw Simone's mother in the produce section. She saw me too and turned away sharply, pulling her cart in the opposite direction. I ran into an old friend from the neighborhood at the bank, and when I mentioned what was happening, she looked uncomfortable and changed the subject. People didn't want to believe a son could steal from his mother. It was easier to believe I was confused, vindictive, or both. But Rachel called every other day. Patricia checked in weekly. And slowly, quietly, I built a life that didn't revolve around Derek's approval or presence. I joined a book club at the library. Started taking morning walks with a woman named Helen from the 3rd floor. Signed up for a watercolor class at the community center. Small things. Normal things. Things that reminded me I existed independently of my role as mother. The day of the hearing arrived cold and bright. I wore a navy dress and the pearls Tom gave me, and Patricia met me at the courthouse steps. She squeezed my hand and said, "You ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than I expected. Derek sat at a table with his attorney, a sharp-faced man in an expensive suit. Simone was in the gallery behind him, her expression hard. Derek didn't look at me when I walked in, just stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. The prosecutor, a woman named Amanda Reyes, presented the evidence methodically. Security footage, transaction records, my testimony about the items being taken without permission, Derek's own admission in our confrontation, which I documented in writing immediately afterward. It was clean, clear, and damning. Derek's attorney argued that this was a family misunderstanding, that Derek believed he had implied permission to handle my belongings during the move, that there was no intent to permanently deprive me of anything. The judge, an older woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, listened without expression. When it came time for Derek to speak, he stood and his voice shook. "Your Honor, I made a terrible mistake. I was under financial stress and I made a choice I deeply regret. But this is my mother. We should be resolving this as a family, not in court." The judge looked at me. "Mrs. Marsh, do you have anything you'd like to say?" I stood slowly. "Your Honor, I raised my son to understand that actions have consequences. I taught him right from wrong. He chose to take things that weren't his, sell them, and lie about it. If he were anyone else's son, we wouldn't question whether charges were appropriate. I'm here because I refuse to accept that family love means accepting abuse." The judge nodded. "Mr. Whitman, I'm finding probable cause to move forward with charges of theft and financial exploitation. You'll be formally arraigned next month. Bail is set at $5,000. Derek's face went white. Simone made a small sound behind him. His attorney immediately started talking about bail reduction, but the judge had already moved on to the next case. Outside the courthouse, Patricia and I stood on the steps while Derek and his attorney argued nearby. Simone glared at me with such hatred I felt it like a physical thing. But I didn't look away. I met her eyes steadily until she turned and walked to their car. Patricia said quietly, "You did the right thing." "I know," I said. "But it doesn't feel good." "It's not supposed to," she replied. Over the next few weeks, Derek's attorney reached out multiple times about a plea deal. They offered restitution, community service, counseling, anything to avoid trial. Prosecutor Reyes consulted with me about each offer. She said ultimately it was my decision whether to accept a plea or push for trial. I thought about it carefully. A trial would be public, painful, and there was no guarantee of a conviction despite the evidence. A plea deal would mean Derek admitted guilt and faced consequences, but smaller ones. I talked to Rachel about it. She said, "What do you want to happen, Mom? Not what's fair or right. What would let you move forward?" "I want him to acknowledge what he did," I said. "Not just to me. Publicly. On record. I want him to understand that this wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. It was a betrayal. Then push for a plea that includes that, Rachel said. I told Prosecutor Reyes what I wanted. A formal guilty plea. Restitution for the full value of the items sold, not just what he received. Mandatory counseling for financial abuse. And a statement on record acknowledging what he did and why it was wrong. Reyes worked it out with Derek's attorney. 3 weeks later we were back in court. Derek stood before the judge and pled guilty to theft from a family member. He agreed to pay $18,000 in restitution over 2 years. He agreed to 100 hours of community service and mandatory counseling. And he read a statement. I stole items from my mother's home without her knowledge or permission, and sold them for personal financial gain. I then lied to her about what happened to these items. I understand that this was theft. I understand that being family does not excuse this behavior. I take full responsibility for my actions. His voice was flat, mechanical. But he said the words. And they were entered into the court record permanently. The judge accepted the plea and outlined the terms. Derek was placed on probation for 2 years. If he failed to meet any of the conditions, he'd face jail time. When it was over, Derek walked out of the courtroom without looking at me. Simone followed him, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. I stood there feeling hollow. This was what justice looked like. Clean, legal, documented. But it didn't feel like victory. It just felt like the end of something that should never have begun. Patricia walked me to my car. She said Derek's attorney had indicated that Derek wanted to reach out to me once some time had passed, to try to rebuild. She asked if I'd be open to that. I don't know, I said honestly. Right now I just want to live my life without looking over my shoulder. That's fair, Patricia said. And Vivian, for what it's worth, you handled this with more grace than most people would have managed. I drove home and called Rachel. Told her it was over. She cried, which made me cry. We stayed on the phone for an hour talking about everything and nothing. When we hung up, I felt wrung out but also strangely peaceful. That evening, I did something I'd been putting off for months. I opened the last box from the move, the one I'd labeled memories, and shoved in the back of my closet. Inside were photo albums, old letters, mementos from my marriage and the kids' childhoods. I spread them out on my living room floor and spent hours going through them. There were pictures of Derek at every age. Baby photos, school pictures, family vacations. I looked at his face in those images and tried to find the moment when things shifted. When the sweet boy became the desperate man who stole from his mother. But there was no single moment. Just a gradual drift I hadn't noticed until the distance was unbridgeable. I put the photos in a new album organized by year. I didn't throw anything away. These memories were real. Even if they didn't tell the whole story. Derek had been loved. He'd been a good kid once. And somewhere in him, maybe that person still existed. But it wasn't my job to find him anymore. That was work Derek had to do himself. I put the album on my bookshelf next to the others and looked around my condo. Finally felt like home. Not a temporary stop. Not a storage unit for someone else's life. Mine. The weeks that followed were quiet. Derek made his first restitution payment on time. I received a check for $750 with no note, no letter. Just his signature on the memo line. I deposited it and put the money toward a trip Rachel and I were planning for the spring. We were going to visit national parks, just the two of us. A reset. I never heard from Derek directly. No apology beyond the courtroom statement. No attempt to explain or justify. And slowly I realized I didn't need those things anymore. His silence was its own kind of answer. I ran into Simone once more months later at a restaurant downtown. I was having lunch with Helen from my building when I saw her across the room. She was with friends, laughing at something someone said. When she glanced up and saw me, her smile froze. We locked eyes for a moment. Then she looked away and didn't look back. I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction. She'd built her life on a foundation of manipulation, and it had crumbled. That wasn't my doing. It was hers and Derek's. I was just the person who refused to be part of the structure anymore. My book club met every Thursday. My watercolor class was on Tuesdays. I walked every morning with Helen and sometimes other neighbors who joined us. I video called Rachel every Sunday, and we'd talk for hours about work and life and plans for our trip. I visited Tom's grave once a month and told him everything, the good and the complicated. One afternoon, about 6 months after the plea deal, I was at the community center hanging my latest watercolor painting in a small local art show when I saw Derek. He was across the room, standing near the refreshment table with a program in his hand. He looked older, thinner. When he saw me, he froze. I could have left. Could have pretended I hadn't seen him. But I didn't. I walked over slowly, and he watched me approach like he wasn't sure if I was real. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. "Derek," I replied. We stood there in awkward silence. Then he said, "I've been going to counseling, working through a lot of things. I'm trying to understand why I did what I did." I nodded. "That's good. I want to apologize," he said. "Not the court version. A real one. I was wrong. I hurt you in ways I'm only starting to understand. And I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know I see it now." I looked at him carefully, searching for manipulation or performance. What I saw instead was exhaustion and something that might have been genuine remorse. "Thank you for saying that," I said. "I mean it. Is there any chance we could talk sometime?" he asked. "Not now. But maybe eventually?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "I'm not ready yet. Maybe someday." He nodded, accepting it. "Okay. I understand." We stood there another moment. Then I turned and walked back to my painting. I didn't look back to see if he stayed or left. It didn't matter. What mattered was that I'd faced him without falling apart, without giving in, without pretending the past hadn't happened. That night, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine and thought about everything that had led to this moment. The pawn shop discovery, the confrontations, the legal battle, the rebuilding. All of it had been necessary, painful and necessary, to get to this place where I could exist on my own terms. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, trimming rose bushes and answering phone calls that shattered her world. She'd been scared and hurt and unsure. But she'd also been strong enough to stand up when it would have been easier to stay quiet. And that strength had carried her here. I didn't know if Derek and I would ever have a real relationship again. Maybe we would. Maybe we wouldn't. But I knew that whatever happened, I wouldn't sacrifice my dignity for the illusion of family peace. I'd learned the difference between love and enabling, between forgiveness and surrender. The city lights sparkled below my balcony, thousands of windows holding thousands of lives. Somewhere out there were other people making impossible choices, standing up for themselves, learning to live with complicated truths. I wasn't alone in this. None of us were. I finished my wine, went inside and looked at my calendar. Tomorrow I had my watercolor class. Saturday, book club. Next month, the trip with Rachel. My life was full, not because I'd forced it to be, but because I'd made room for it by letting go of what no longer served me. I got ready for bed, checked my locks one final time and turned off the lights. As I drifted toward sleep, I thought about Tom and imagined him proud of me. Not for winning anything, not for being right, but for surviving with my dignity intact, for choosing myself when it mattered most. And in the darkness I smiled, because tomorrow would come, and I would face it the same way I'd faced everything else. One step at a time with clear eyes and steady hands, knowing that the only person I needed to prove anything to was the woman in the mirror. And she was doing just fine. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.